I found out my HOA president broke into my house while I was 3 states away burying my grandmother, not to check a leak. Not because of an emergency, not even with the decency to pretend it was urgent. She let herself in like she owned the place. She went through my bedroom drawers. She spread my private paperwork across my desk and photographed it piece by piece. Bank documents, medical files, personal letters I hadn't even had the strength to look at since my grandmother passed. And when she finally left, she took something that could never be replaced. My grandmother's pearl necklace, the one she wore on her wedding day, the one she promised would stay in the family. I didn't realize any of this right away. When I came home, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside, the house felt wrong, not broken into, not trashed, just violated. The silence wasn't calm anymore. It felt disturbed, like someone had been inside my life and rearranged it without permission. My office files were slightly out of order. My bedroom smelled like a stranger's perfume. And when I opened the jewelry box, my chest went hollow. At first, I thought grief was messing with my head. Then I opened my security app, and there she was. Patricia Langford, the HOA president, standing in my hallway with a clipboard, smiling straight at my camera like she belonged there. What she didn't know, what she never even thought to check, was that every room in my house recorded audio and video. And in a single afternoon, she handed me everything I needed. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Before Patricia Langford ever stepped foot inside my house, I honestly believed moving to Cedar Hollow, Missouri would give me peace. The kind of quiet that settles into your bones after years of stress. The kind where evenings stretch long, porch lights glow warm, and nothing ever really happens. I inherited the house from my grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, who had lived there since the early 1970s. Nearly her entire adult life was wrapped up in those walls. Birthdays on the porch, Sunday mornings with coffee and birdsong. Every creak in the floor had a memory attached to it. The house itself wasn't fancy. A single story, faded siding. A wide front porch that caught the afternoon shade. Old oak trees lined the street, thick enough that summer sunlight filtered through in slow-moving patches. Neighbors waved when you drove by. Some even stopped to introduce themselves when they saw me unloading boxes. It felt safe, predictable. Exactly what I needed after everything I'd been through. The homeowners association existed, sure, but it barely registered as a concern. A modest yearly fee. A thin packet of rules about mailbox colors, parking overnight on the street, and keeping fences in decent shape. Nothing aggressive. Nothing threatening. For a while, I forgot it was even there. That illusion lasted right up until Patricia Langford realized I wasn't the type to fold. The first issue was so small it almost felt laughable. Water bills in Cedar Hollow had been creeping up every year, and the summers were getting hotter. My grandmother had always loved flowers, especially the wild ones that grew along the back fence. So I decided to replace part of the front lawn with native wildflowers and drought-resistant plants. I did the research. I checked county guidelines. I made sure nothing violated state codes. It wasn't sloppy or overgrown. It was intentional, clean, alive. 3 days after the first seedlings went into the ground, a violation notice appeared taped to my front door. It accused me of unauthorized landscaping changes and demanded immediate restoration of turf grass. The letter was curt, stamped with the HOA logo, and signed by Patricia Langford, president. I shrugged it off at first. Mistake, I thought. Something easily cleared up. Then came the second notice. Then the third. Each one escalated. Fines listed per day. Threats of forced remediation. Language that felt more like a legal threat than a neighborhood reminder. And then Patricia started showing up in person. She never knocked. I'd look out my window and see her walking slowly across my yard, clipboard in hand, snapping photos. Sometimes she leaned toward the windows, cupping her hands around her eyes to peer inside. Once, I caught her circling the back of the house, writing something down as if she were inspecting a crime scene. I finally stepped outside and asked her, calmly, to stop coming onto my property without permission. She smiled at me like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked and said, "The HOA has authority when homeowners refuse to cooperate. Not ask, not discuss." Authority. That was the moment something shifted in my chest. I realized this wasn't about flowers. It wasn't about water usage or curb appeal. It was about control. Patricia wasn't used to homeowners who questioned her. She thrived on compliance, on people nodding along just to avoid trouble. And the fact that I had paperwork, permits, and the nerve to say no made me a problem she needed to crush. After that conversation, things got worse fast. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. I overheard whispers when I walked my trash to the curb. Someone left an anonymous note in my mailbox warning me that Patricia didn't lose fights. At the next HOA meeting, my address was mentioned repeatedly, framed as an example of declining standards. Patricia spoke about my yard like it was a disease. I still didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't escalate. I documented everything. Every letter, every fine. Every email she sent late at night with increasingly aggressive language. I took photos of my own property, time-stamped and stored. I requested records. I asked questions. Each time, Patricia's responses grew colder and more personal. One evening, as I sat in my grandmother's old living room, I realized something else. If Patricia was comfortable walking onto my property without permission in broad daylight, what would stop her from doing more when she thought no one was watching? That thought wouldn't let me sleep. The next morning, I installed cameras, not obvious ones. Small, discrete devices positioned to capture entrances, hallways, and shared spaces. I wasn't trying to spy on anyone. I was protecting myself, protecting my home, protecting the last thing my grandmother had left me. I had no idea then just how much those cameras were about to change everything. Patricia didn't slow down after the cameras went up. If anything, she sped up, like she could sense she was losing control and needed to tighten her grip before it slipped completely. The emails started coming daily, sometimes twice a day, always marked urgent, always written in that stiff official tone that tried to sound neutral but never quite hid the hostility underneath. She cited vague sections of the HOA bylaws, twisted phrases out of context, and added new concerns that hadn't existed the week before. My garden was now a safety hazard. The color of my mulch was suddenly non-compliant. The placement of my trash bins was allegedly confusing to passers-by. Then she took it public. At the next HOA meeting, Patricia stood at the front of the room with a stack of papers and a practiced smile. She didn't say my name at first. She didn't have to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. She spoke in that careful way people use when they want to insult someone without being called out for it. Phrases like "a certain homeowner" and "patterns of resistance" floated through the room. She suggested that refusal to follow HOA guidance often went hand in hand with emotional instability. A few people nodded. Others stared at the floor. When I stood up and calmly corrected her, citing county ordinances and the actual wording of the bylaws, she didn't argue the facts. She tilted her head and smiled again, like I was proving her point just by speaking. After that meeting, flyers started appearing in mailboxes up and down the street. They warned about property value risks and unapproved landscaping spreading pests. My house wasn't mentioned by name, but there was a grainy photo of my front yard printed in the corner. Someone had circled it in red ink. Neighbors. I'd waved to just weeks earlier suddenly avoided eye contact. Patricia had turned me into a problem everyone was supposed to fear. I still tried to handle it the normal way. I wrote letters, sent emails, attached documentation. I quoted county water conservation guidelines. I included photos of other homes with similar landscaping that had never been fined. I requested formal hearings. I asked for mediation. Each attempt at reason was met with either silence or a colder, sharper response. It was like logic didn't exist in her world, only pressure. And the harder I pushed for fairness, the more personal her attacks became. She accused me of being hostile, of making other residents uncomfortable. She suggested that my refusal to comply might indicate larger issues. At one point, she implied that someone with my attitude probably shouldn't be living alone in a community with families and seniors. That line stuck with me. It wasn't subtle, it was a warning. Then, in the middle of all of it, my grandmother passed. The call came early in the morning. I remember standing in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wildflowers just starting to bloom outside the window. Everything else? The HOA, the fines, Patricia's voice, fell away in an instant. None of it mattered anymore. I packed a bag, locked the house, and drove for hours with my thoughts spinning somewhere between grief and numbness. I left town immediately for the funeral, trusting naively that even Patricia Langford had limits, that even someone who thrived on control would respect the basic boundary of death. I told myself no one would be petty enough to use that moment against me. No one would dare cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. I was wrong. While I was gone, emails continued to pile up in my inbox, unanswered because I couldn't bring myself to look at them. Voicemails followed, short clip messages about unresolved violations and time-sensitive matters. One mentioned an inspection. Another referenced health and safety concerns. I barely registered any of it. I was too busy standing in a quiet room saying goodbye to the woman who raised me. I didn't know then what those messages really meant. I didn't know that Patricia had decided grief made me vulnerable. That absence meant opportunity. That with me out of town, she believed she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. She crossed lines that can't be explained away as misunderstandings or overreach. She crossed lines that turned disputes into crimes. And when I finally drove back to Cedar Hollow, exhausted and hollowed out, I still believed the worst thing I'd find waiting for me would be another stack of fines on the counter. I had no idea how wrong I was. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly the way I'd left it. No broken windows, no kicked-in door, no obvious signs that anything was wrong. For a brief moment, I thought maybe I'd been lucky. Maybe Patricia's threats had just been noise. Maybe grief had made me paranoid. That illusion lasted about 30 seconds. The moment I stepped inside, something felt off. Not chaos control. Things weren't overturned or destroyed. They were handled, touched, slightly rearranged in ways only someone who had taken their time would bother with. The air felt heavier, like it had been breathed by strangers. My office chair wasn't pushed in the way I always left it. A folder on my desk sat at a different angle. And when I walked into my bedroom, I caught a faint scent that didn't belong to me or my grandmother. Floral. Sharp. Artificial. That was when I noticed the jewelry box. It was open. At first, my brain refused to connect the dots. I stood there longer than I care to admit, staring at the empty space where my grandmother's pearl necklace should have been. The one she wore in every important photo. The one she clasped around her neck on her wedding day. The one she trusted me with when her hands started to shake too badly to fasten it herself. It was gone. My hands started trembling, and for a second, I honestly wondered if I'd moved it myself and forgotten. Grief does strange things to memory. It bends time. It blurs moments together. I wanted there to be a reasonable explanation. I needed there to be one. So I opened my phone. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath when I tapped into my security app. The first clip loaded slowly, then sharpened into focus. There was my front door. And there was Patricia Langford. She stood on my porch with a clipboard tucked under her arm, speaking animatedly to a locksmith beside her. I couldn't hear them yet, but her body language was unmistakable, confident, relaxed, like she'd done this before. The timestamp showed a weekday afternoon, right in the middle of the funeral service I'd attended hours away. The next clip showed the door unlocking. My stomach dropped. Two men followed her inside, both wearing reflective safety vests like props in a bad disguise. Patricia stepped in first, heels clicking against my floor, and didn't hesitate for a second. She didn't look around like someone entering an unfamiliar space. She walked straight in like she belonged there. Then the audio kicked in. "This won't take long," she said brightly. "We just need to document a few things for the file." I watched her move through my house, opening doors, flipping light switches, pointing at things as she spoke. She made comments about my furniture, about my grandmother's old photos on the wall. She laughed at one point and said, "You can tell a lot about someone by how they live." When she reached my office, she stopped pretending. She spread my paperwork across the desk and photographed everything. Bank statements, medical correspondence, legal documents. She picked things up, read them out loud, and made notes on her clipboard. At one point, she shook her head and said, "This explains a lot, definitely unstable." I felt something inside me go cold. In my bedroom, it got worse. She opened drawers, held up personal items and smirked. She commented on how messy grief made people. She mocked the fact that I was out of town for a funeral, saying it gave her a clean window to handle things properly. Then she said the words that made my chest ache. "If we document enough, we can force a sale. Distressed properties always move fast." It wasn't speculation. It wasn't frustration. It was a plan. She wasn't there to inspect. She was there to build a case against me using my own life as evidence. To paint me as unstable, non-compliant, unfit to remain in the community, to push me out and profit from it. And then she went to the jewelry box. She opened it slowly, like she already knew what was inside. Her face changed when she saw the pearls. Something close to hunger flashed across her expression. She lifted the necklace, held it up to the light, and smiled. "These will do nicely," she said. She didn't hide it. She didn't hesitate. She draped it into her purse like it was payment she was owed. When the footage ended, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, phone shaking in my hands, heart pounding so hard it felt painful. The worst part wasn't the theft. It wasn't even the invasion of my home. It was the certainty that Patricia had looked at my grief and seen opportunity, that she had crossed from harassment into something darker, something deliberate, that she believed her title protected her from consequences. She had walked into my house thinking she was untouchable, and she had done it all on camera. I didn't call Patricia. I didn't send an angry email. I didn't show up at her house or storm into an HOA meeting demanding answers. As much as every part of me wanted to confront her immediately, I knew that was exactly what she expected. A blow-up, an emotional reaction she could twist into proof of everything she'd been saying about me. So I did the opposite. I got quiet. I treated what I'd seen on those cameras the same way I'd treat any other serious problem, methodically, patiently, and with documentation. I made copies of every video file and stored them in multiple places. I labeled timestamps. I wrote notes. I backed everything up. If Patricia thought I was unstable, I was about to show her just how calm and organized grief could be. Then I started looking beyond my own situation. The more I thought about the way she moved through my house, confident, practiced, completely unafraid, the more certain I became that I wasn't her first target. People don't act that comfortable crossing lines unless they've crossed them before and gotten away with it. I requested HOA records. Not casually, formally. In writing. Citing the bylaws that guaranteed homeowners access to financial documents. At first, the response was delayed, then partial, then defensive. I received scanned pages with sections blacked out for privacy reasons that made no sense. When I asked follow-up questions, I was told the treasurer would get back to me. So I found the treasurer myself. His name was Mark Delaney. Quiet guy, lived 2 streets over. He'd served in the role for years without much fanfare. I knocked on his door one evening, not accusing, not threatening, just asking questions. He looked tired, older than I remembered. When I mentioned missing documents, his shoulders sagged slightly. He didn't invite me in. He didn't deny anything either. All he said was, "Be careful," before closing the door. That was enough. I started comparing what little financial information I had with public records. Vendor names, payment schedules, amounts that repeated in suspiciously round numbers. A landscaping consultant, paid monthly despite no visible work. Emergency repair fees that never resulted in repairs. When I searched the business names, some didn't exist at all. Others traced back to post office boxes or dissolved companies. One name appeared over and over again. Langford Property Consulting, Patricia's last name. The fees weren't small, thousands at a time. Insistent, quiet. Buried in paperwork most homeowners never bothered to read. It was a siphon disguised as administration. As I dug deeper, I started talking to neighbors, but carefully. No accusations. No drama, just listening. I asked about fines they'd received, about sudden pressure to sell, about emergency violations. They came out of nowhere. The stories lined up too neatly to be coincidence. An older couple forced to sell after being fined into exhaustion. A single mother hit with daily penalties over a fence she didn't install. A retired veteran whose driveway was suddenly declared non-compliant right before his house went on the market with Patricia as the listing agent. This wasn't random enforcement. It was a system. Patricia created problems, applied pressure, and waited for people to break. When they did, she swooped in, bought low, or collected commissions, and the HOA paid her along the way through fake consulting fees and emergency oversight. I documented everything. Spreadsheets, timelines, names, dates. I matched payments to enforcement actions. Cross-referenced HOA meeting minutes with financial withdrawals. Every time someone was targeted, money moved shortly after. And then there were the cameras. I rewatched the footage from my house, this time listening not just to what Patricia did, but what she said. The way she talked about distressed properties, about how quickly things moved once homeowners were overwhelmed, about forcing sales like it was a business strategy, not a moral failing. That language mattered. It wasn't speculation. It was intent. By the time I finished compiling everything, I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't angry in the wild, uncontrollable way I'd felt when I first watched the footage. I was focused, grounded, clear. Patricia Langford wasn't just a bully with a clipboard and a title. She was running a racket. And, for the first time since my grandmother died, I felt something solid beneath my feet. I had proof, and I wasn't done yet. The notice for the emergency HOA meeting hit my inbox late on a Sunday night. The subject line was aggressive, all capital letters, packed with words like immediate, act safety concern, and mandatory attendance. The agenda was short and vague, but it didn't take much imagination to understand what it was really about. Me. Patricia Langford had decided it was time to finish what she started. This meeting wasn't about landscaping or compliance. It was about control. About putting me in front of the entire neighborhood and framing me as a problem that needed to be dealt with. A public execution carried out with bylaws and bad faith. When I walked into the community center that evening, the room felt different than any HOA meeting I'd attended before. Chairs were packed tight. Neighbors whispered in small clusters. Some people avoided my eyes. Others watched me carefully, like they were waiting to see which version of me Patricia had described. Patricia sat at the front table, perfectly composed. Her blazer was pressed. Her hair immaculate, Beside her sat a man in a dark suit with a leather briefcase, her lawyer. She smiled when she saw me, the same thin, confident smile she'd worn on my security footage, and motioned for the meeting to begin. She spoke first. Patricia didn't yell or insult me outright. She didn't need to. She framed everything as concern. Concern for the community. Concern for safety. Concern for patterns of behavior. She told the room that she had received multiple complaints about me. That I'd been hostile, uncooperative, and increasingly aggressive. She suggested that my refusal to comply with HOA directives was only one symptom of a larger issue. Then she dropped the real accusation. She claimed I had been harassing HOA board members with surveillance equipment. She gestured toward me and said calmly that my cameras were excessive and possibly illegal. She implied that I'd installed them to intimidate the board. Her lawyer followed up by referencing privacy concerns and potential violations, speaking just vaguely enough to sound authoritative without saying anything concrete. I could feel the tension in the room tighten. What Patricia didn't know was that while she'd been preparing her performance, I'd been preparing something else entirely. The police already had my footage. I'd submitted it days earlier, not as an emotional complaint, but as evidence. Clear, labeled, time-stamped. Break-in. Theft. Unauthorized entry. Audio included. They hadn't promised me anything yet, but they'd listened. Carefully. She also didn't know that earlier that same week, I'd visited the county clerk's office. I brought copies of the inspection paperwork Patricia had used to justify entering my home. The clerk didn't even need 10 minutes. There was no record of it. No filing. No emergency authorization. The signatures were wrong. The formatting was outdated. It was a forgery. And Patricia definitely didn't know that half the people sitting in that room had already seen the evidence. I hadn't blasted it on social media. I hadn't sent mass emails. I'd shown it quietly, one-on-one, to people who'd asked questions. People who'd been fined, people who'd been afraid. I let them see Patricia in my house. Let them hear her voice. Let them draw their own conclusions. As Patricia finished her opening statement, her lawyer leaned back with a satisfied nod. They believed they were in control, that the room belonged to them. She turned to me and said, "Would you like to respond?" I stood slowly. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "Yes, but first, I think everyone here deserves to see something." I connected my laptop to the projector. Patricia's smile flickered. For the first time since this began, I saw uncertainty cross her face. She glanced at her lawyer, then back at the screen, as if trying to calculate whether she could still steer this in her favor. She couldn't. The first video froze on the screen, Patricia unlocking my front door. The room went silent. Before anyone could speak, there was a knock at the back of the room. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Patricia turned in her chair. She still didn't understand. But she was about to. I didn't skip ahead. I didn't edit anything down. I didn't soften it for the room. I played the footage from the very beginning. The projector hummed quietly as the first frame appeared on the wall behind the board table. Patricia on my porch, clipboard tucked under her arm. Confident posture, familiar smile. A few people shifted in their chairs immediately. Someone in the back let out a quiet, confused laugh, like they were waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. The video rolled on. The locksmith. The door unlocking. Patricia stepping inside my house like she belonged there. When the audio kicked in and her voice filled the room, the air changed. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Clear. Casual. Unafraid. "This won't take long," she said on the recording. "We just need to document a few things for the file." Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone whispered her name, not angrily but in disbelief. The footage moved from room to room. Patricia pointing, commenting, laughing. When she spread my paperwork across the desk and started photographing it, I heard a sharp intake of breath from the front row. A woman stood halfway up from her chair, then slowly sat back down, eyes fixed on the screen. When Patricia referred to me as definitely unstable, the silence turned heavy. No one coughed, no one shifted. Even her lawyer sat frozen, hands clasped too tightly together. I let it play. The bedroom footage came next, drawers opening. Personal items handled. Patricia mocking my grief, saying my being out of town made things easier. Someone in the room shook their head slowly over and over, like they were trying to wake up from a bad dream. And then the jewelry box. The camera zoomed slightly as Patricia opened it. The pearls glinted under the light. She smiled, lifted them, dropped them into her purse. A gasp echoed through the room. "That's my grandmother's," I said quietly, not to Patricia but to everyone else. "She stole them while I was burying her." The footage ended. No one spoke. Patricia was pale now. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at her lawyer, waiting for him to stand up, to object, to do something. He didn't move. He stared at the floor like he'd just realized how badly he'd misjudged the room. "This footage was provided to law enforcement," I continued, still calm, "along with the forged inspection paperwork used to enter my home. The county clerk confirmed there was no authorization, no emergency order, no legal basis for any of it." Patricia finally found her voice. "This is harassment," she shouted, standing abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is edited. This is a setup. He's been stalking me. He's obsessed. This is exactly what I warned you all about." Her voice cracked on the last word. Before anyone could respond, the doors at the back of the room opened. 2 detectives walked in, badges visible, expressions unreadable. The sound Patricia made wasn't a scream at first. It was a sharp, panicked inhale. She backed away from the table, shaking her head, repeating the word "no" under her breath, like if she said it enough times the moment would rewind. One of the detectives spoke calmly. "Patricia Langford, you are being detained in connection with an ongoing investigation involving burglary, theft, and fraud." The room erupted. People stood up. Voices overlapped. Someone demanded answers. Someone else started crying. Patricia's lawyer rushed forward, talking too fast, insisting on rights and procedures, but the detectives barely glanced at him. Patricia tried one last time. "This is a conspiracy," she yelled, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "He planned this. He manipulated all of you. You're letting a disturbed man destroy this community." No one moved to help her. When the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrist, the sound cut through the chaos like a gavel striking wood. Final. Unavoidable. As the detectives led her toward the exit, something remarkable happened. People stepped aside, not in respect, in refusal. No one met her eyes. No one defended her. The authority she'd wielded for years, through fear, fines, and paperwork, evaporated in real time. In the very room she used to silence everyone else, she stood powerless. The doors closed behind her. For a moment, the room stayed frozen, like everyone needed proof that she was really gone. Then someone in the front row spoke. "So, what happens now?" And for the first time since I moved into Cedar Hollow, the question didn't feel like a threat. It felt like the beginning of something honest. Patricia's removal from power didn't happen all at once. It unraveled the way most lies do, slowly at first, then all at once, until there was nothing left to hold together. The night she was taken out of that meeting in handcuffs, the HOA board dissolved in real time. 2 members resigned within days, claiming they had no knowledge of her actions. The treasurer stepped down shortly after and agreed to cooperate fully once investigators started asking questions that couldn't be brushed off with vague answers. What had once felt like an untouchable structure suddenly looked flimsy, held together by fear and habit rather than legitimacy. The audit came next. It wasn't optional. The county ordered it after reviewing the initial evidence, and once it started, it didn't take long for the truth to surface. Years of financial records were pulled apart line by line. Emergency fees that never resulted in repairs. Consulting payments that led nowhere. Accounts that quietly funneled money out of the HOA and into companies tied back to Patricia herself. Every missing dollar had a trail. Every trail led back to the same name. Homeowners who had felt crazy for questioning fines finally had answers. Seniors who had been pressured into selling realized they hadn't imagined the harassment. Families who had scraped together money to pay penalties learned those funds had been feeding someone else's lifestyle. The HOA didn't just lose money, it lost credibility. As the investigation widened, Patricia's other world started collapsing too. Her real estate license was suspended pending review. Then revoked. The listings disappeared. The signs came down. Clients backed away quietly, unwilling to be associated with someone whose name was now appearing in public records for all the wrong reasons. When the formal charges came, no one was surprised. Burglary, theft, fraud, forgery. Watching it unfold was surreal. For so long, Patricia had been everywhere. Emails, meetings, notices taped to doors. Then suddenly, she was gone. No voice, no authority. Just a defendant sitting quietly behind a table she no longer controlled. The day my grandmother's jewelry was returned, I held the necklace longer than I expected. The pearls were cool against my palm, familiar in a way that brought a tightness to my throat. They came back in an evidence bag, carefully documented, but still unmistakably hers. It felt like something that had been ripped out of my family history had finally been set right. I took them home and placed them back in the jewelry box, closing it gently this time. The HOA didn't survive in its old form. It couldn't. Too much damage had been done. But instead of dissolving completely, the community chose to rebuild it from the ground up. New leadership was elected, this time with transparency written into every rule. Financial statements were shared openly. Meetings were recorded. Questions were welcomed instead of punished. Something unexpected happened in the weeks that followed. People talked to each other again. Neighbors stopped by my porch to apologize for believing the flyers. Some admitted they'd been scared. Others said they'd assumed compliance was easier than confrontation. No one made excuses for what Patricia had done, but many quietly acknowledged how easily fear had kept them silent. The wildflowers bloomed right around then. They filled in the front yard with color-soft purples, yellows, whites, moving gently in the breeze. More than one person commented on them as they passed by. A couple asked what kinds they were. One neighbor mentioned planting something similar. The thing Patricia had tried so hard to frame as a problem became a point of connection. Standing there one evening, watching the light settle over the yard, I realized something important had shifted. For the first time since I moved to Cedar Hollow, the neighborhood didn't feel like a collection of houses governed by threats and fines. It felt like people, imperfect, cautious, but willing to look out for each other again. Patricia lost her position, then her license, then her freedom, but the rest of us gained something back. A sense that our homes were actually ours, that rules existed to serve the community, not control it. That authority only worked when people agreed to believe in it, and that once the truth came out, fear stopped working. I didn't plant wildflowers to make a statement, but somehow they became one anyway. What I learned from all of this is simple, but it's something I don't think enough people hear until it's too late. Bullies don't rely on strength. They rely on titles, paperwork, and the assumption that no one will challenge them. They hide behind forms and authority and hope fear will do the rest. Cameras don't care about any of that. They don't care who you think you are or what position you hold. Patricia believed grief would make me weak. She thought loss would distract me, that I'd be too tired, too emotional, too broken to notice what she was doing or to fight back. What she didn't understand is that grief didn't take my clarity away. It sharpened it. It stripped everything down to what actually mattered and made me precise in a way I hadn't been before. My home is quiet again now. The kind of quiet that feels earned, safe, restored. I lock the door at night and don't feel that knot in my stomach anymore. The cameras are still there, but they don't feel like a shield anymore. They're just part of the house, like the walls and the windows. And every time the wind moves through the wildflowers out front, I think about my grandmother. I imagine her sitting on the porch, watching them sway, smiling that knowing smile she always had when she thought I'd finally done something right. The house she loved stood its ground, and in doing so, it protected more than just me. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?